I'm more worried right now with the threat coming out of Washington, D.C. That's the real threat to my liberties. That's the real threat to the Constitution, is coming from our own government. I mean, look at the Patriot Act that they passed. I mean, that's the most unpatriotic piece of legislation ever. And that was in response to 9/11. And people don't understand how bad the Patriot Act is because they don't really understand all the nuances. But I work in the financial industry, so I know what it did. The Patriot Act abolished all financial privacy in the United States. So that anybody in this room who opens up a bank account or a brokerage firm, their bank or their broker is actually an unpaid IRS agent, an FBI agent, who is looking at everything you do and who is required by law to scrutinize every transaction you make, every check you send in, every time you take money out, and spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time looking for things that are suspicious. And if they're suspicious, we need to give them information to the government so that they can go to the IRS, go to the FBI, make sure you're paying all your taxes, you're not doing anything wrong. And if we don't rat you out, we can get fined, we can be in prison. That's the country we live in right now. And, so that's what I want to stop. I don't want governments passing those kind of laws and calling it patriotism. We give these guys the opportunity. The government requires truth in advertising. We ought to have truth in legislating. Because whatever legislation they pass is actually the opposite of what they're doing. Because, they didn't want to call it the Unpatriotic Act because nobody would vote for it. So they named it the Patriot Act. And so the people vote for it. Like they just passed the jobs bill. They wanted, everybody wants jobs. If they called it the job killing bill, then nobody would vote for it.
Here are these great ideas. How are you going to go about it to convince the Senate?
Well, one of the things is the economy is going to keep getting worse the entire time I'm in the Senate, right? More and more people are going to be unemployed. Ultimately, inflation is going to flare up. So things are going to get increasingly more miserable in this country. And at some point, right, somebody is going to have to realize that they can't keep doing the same thing. That maybe there's a connection. You see, my point is, Congress has set this big fire in the country, and it's raging. And all they do to put it out is pour gasoline on it. And every time the fire gets bigger, they just reach for another bucket of gasoline. And they haven't made the connection yet. That's what I'm going to help them do. I have plenty of time to talk to these guys. Right now they won't talk to me. Even though I'm one of the few people in the country that accurately predicted the economic crisis. And I get invitations to speak all around the world. And they pay me a lot of money. I speak at economic conference in Saudi Arabia. I spoke at one in Poland. Right? In Poland, they know that I predicted the economic crisis. And so I was on a panel with a Nobel Prize winning economists discussing it. They won't invite me to Washington. They had a hearing in Washington just recently on the cause of the financial crisis. I emailed them, I called them, I tried to get them to invite me. First of all, they didn't even need a hearing. They could have bought copies of my book, Crash Proof, and they would have known exactly why we had an economic crisis, and it would have only cost them $16 a copy. They didn't just spend all this money, but they didn't invite me. Instead, they invited all the people that were laughing at me, that said we couldn't have an economic crisis. They invited the people that helped cause the economic crisis. So I got to get to Washington. The only way I'm going to get my ideas there is if you send me there as a senator. They're not going to invite me to their party. I've got to crash it. But if I'm there, I'm going to get in their face. I mean, the way this Congress works, all the senators' offices are in a hall. They're all one after another. All I got to do is knock on the door. How are they going to keep me out of their office? I corner them, I talk to them. And, just the way I'm speaking here right now, I will be on the Senate floor filibustering constantly, trying to stop what they're doing. One of the first things I want to do with the filibuster is I want to stop them from raising the debt ceiling. That's all I have to do. They just raised it by another $2 trillion. And the problem is, by the time I get to Washington, we would have blown through that $2 trillion, and they're going to try to raise it again. If we could just have a permanent ceiling, if I could just filibuster and get enough people to say no to raising the debt ceiling, then they can't spend. They have no choice. They have to cut. See, the threat they always make is, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, you're going to shut down the government. Well, that doesn't threaten me. Shut it down. Because if we don't shut down the government's going to shut down the country. So let's just call their bluff and stop it, and they'll do something. But I just need other senators, to stand behind me and fight for the country. And I think, I can go back. I've got such a track record. If you want to look, you go on YouTube and type in Peter Schiff. Look at the thousands of videos. Look, one of them is Peter Schiff was right. which somebody put together, which features television appearances of me in 2006 and 2007, arguing with everybody on CNBC and Fox. Over 1.6 million people have seen that. But there are other lectures. I mean, there's one lecture that I did in front of the Western Regional Mortgage Bankers Association in 2006. 3,000 mortgage bankers at their national convention in Las Vegas, and I explained to them exactly how the mortgage market was going to collapse. To the collapse of subprime, to the problems with the phony ratings of the rating agencies, to the phony appraisals, to the bankruptcy of Fannie and Freddie. I laid out exactly what was going to happen when guys like Ben Bernanke were on national television saying there wasn't even a housing bubble, and that housing prices, the prices were justified by the fundamentals and they would never go down, and even if they did, it wouldn't hurt the economy. So I've got the track record. It's all there in my books. Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse, came out in February of 2007. And over 200,000 copies have been sold, but I laid out in advance what was going to happen. So I think I can show the other senators that I know what I'm talking about, because they know that they don't. I mean, they know nothing about economics. And the problem is the people that they're listening to, they don't know anything about it either, but they have an agenda. So I can, I think, knock some sense into their heads and get stuff done. Any other questions? Any particular policies, legislation? All right. Well, if anybody wants to, learn a little more about my campaign, you can go to my website, which is shiftforsenate.com. My campaign headquarters are in Milford. If anybody wants to stop by, if anybody wants to volunteer, we've got a lot of volunteers around the state already, but we can certainly use some more. If you want to make a contribution, you're welcome to do that as well. Thanks.